right, so welcome to the Bible in 1 year with Ochido Ayi, and I'm your host Ochido. Um, it's good to see you today. So, if you're joining me for the first time, you're welcome, and for those who have joined me before, thank you for tuning in again. If you This podcast is about the Bible in 1 year. We just go through the Bible from cover to cover. I challenge myself to do it again. I have done it before. I found it so transforming, and I thought this time around I wanted to do it again and do it with an audience. So I don't want to be doing it alone because I want to get to share the stories and hear what your own thoughts are about it. So every single day we follow the structured Bible guide from this Bible reading guide. It's written by the church I attend, my senior pastors, and every day we look at an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Psalm, and a Proverb. Some people say that's too much for them, and that's fine. So just find one that works for you and then follow it through. This requires discipline and focus and a dedicated, like a commitment to seeing it through. And that's what it is bringing out of me this year. Today is day 201, and we're seeing the back end of some of the things that happen in the book of Kings with Solomon and David, So we're looking today at Second Chronicles chapters 1 to chapters 3. We'll be looking at Romans. What did I write it here? Romans chapter 6, verses 1 to 23. And then, of course, Proverbs 19, verses 20 to 21. We're done with the book of Psalms. Today is day 201, right? So we're done with the book of Psalms. So very quickly, let me run through it. Now, Solomon had become king, and God really, really elevated him. Solomon was no longer ordinary, and the manner in which he became king was also extraordinary. He went on to a high place in Gibeon, accompanied by his I don't know what you call them now, followers, his subjects, his people, and he went there. He went there accompanied by his people. The high place was where he made that sacrifice, where God showed up and said, "All right, I'm listening. What do you want?" The ark used to be there until David brought it into Kiriath Jearim, where he pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem. So the ark if you followed me for a while, you know the time when the ark was brought in and David pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem with a lot of fanfare, Anyway, forgive me, this particular subject is a bit, in my notes I put so much together. On the weekends my diary doesn't take so much, so I have to use a lot of hello Mia Khalifa, nice to see you. Actually, I don't I don't, but it's great to have you here, and I'm now acquainted, so I know you now, Mia Khalifa, so you're welcome. Okay, so the bronze altar by her son was there. That was where Solomon offered one. Set you up on Google. Okay, I will. I'll check you up. And so I hope if I find you, I can find you again and say something. Okay, but possibly I'll come look for you on YouTube and tell you I've checked you out, and I've seen who you are and what you're about. But thank you for having such a famous person on my podcast this morning. My podcast is titled The Bible in 1 year. So we're reading through the Bible this entire year, and I read it, I retell the stories, share insight if I have any, share anything I'm pleased with or not, and then encourage you to say in the comments what you think as well. So that's what I'm doing here. Nice to meet you. Yeah. All right, so Solomon, this was where Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings. That night, God appeared to him and said, all right, I'm listening, go on, ask. So Solomon says, you have been merciful to my dad. You've established your promise to have a king, his son, in his stead after him. You've made me king after so many, like these people, and I'm a child. I'm just but a young boy. So I really love some wisdom, knowledge, and some wisdom and knowledge, so that because who can really lead these crazy people, right? You know how these people are. I can't even lead them. So God says to him, all right, I'm glad to see that you're thinking about other people. I'm impressed that your heart is not really about the life of your enemies or riches or long life. So I'm going to give you all that stuff. I'm going to give you the wisdom you asked for, the understanding you asked for, the wisdom to lead these people you asked for, but I'm going to top it up. I'm going to give you long life. I'm going to give you honor. I'm going to make sure that around the world, no one will ever be as wise as you are and as wealthy as you are. No one has been like you, and there will be no one after you. That's how impressed I am with you. On one condition, that you stick with me, just like your father David did. Stay with me, and I will make sure I establish you. I used to think, when someone is established, what does that even mean? It means that years, centuries after they're gone, they are still enthroned, they are still spoken of in honor, they still have a place in the minds of people 200 years later, 400 years later, 8,000 years later. That is what it means to be established, you know. So he tells Solomon, I will establish you. Anyway, Solomon reigns. All of that thing God promises in Solomon. They don't bother to tell us about the story of how he divided. The baby came and then they said, oh, divide the baby. So if you want to know that story, I think in the episode of the book of Kings, Second Kings, First Kings, Second Kings, you'll see the story about Solomon there, and you can catch up with it. Anyway, Solomon reigned. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen. He had gold and silver. In his time, it was as common as stone, like as sand. Like the kingdom became extremely wealthy, as common as sand. Cedars were abundant like sycamore trees. Imported horses and chariots all the way from Egypt and Lebanon. 750,000 silver. He had 750. He bought them. He bought the imported items with 750,000 silver shekels or silver talents or whatever. You know, Solomon was determined to build the temple his father had charged him to build, and so 80,000 was stone quarry. 80,000 was kept for 80,000, like their currency, stone and silver and gold were kept for stone quarry. 3,006 people to supervise, 80,000 people to cut stone. He asked the king of Tyre for help. He tells him that, look, I'm building the temple my daddy had said we should build, and I'm building it so that we can have a place for our public holidays, our monthly and yearly annual festivals and sacrifices. Basically, our own place of worship. Israel didn't have a place at that time. So the king of Tyre says, okay, I'm going to send you some guy, you know. First of all, Israel is lucky to have such a wise king. You're young, but you're already so wise. Your story has gone far and wide. Israel is lucky, and David is lucky to have a son like you in his stead. You know, we know how our sons can be, right? Yeah. So, I mean, if you look in history, many times a lot of powerful men don't have powerful children. A lot of honorable men, their kids didn't end up being honorable. So I guess it's a big deal when a king, someone of that magnitude, produces another person just as honorable or even more honorable and magnificent than him. So the king of Tyre recognized that about Solomon. So he said, okay, I'll send you a guy called Huram. He's super skillful, and Solomon offered him payment. I'll pay you money for if you send me skilled people. So he's like, I'll send you a guy called Huram. He's super skillful. You can send the payment in. And so Solomon made the Solomon made the foreigners in his country bear. So the thing I've noticed about reading the Bible is that they'll say one thing here, then they'll say A, then they'll say D, then they'll come back and say B, and then they'll say C, D, E, F, G, then they'll say B again in front. Like, so it's just good to be able to get it in context. So they will say things that they will say here, and then they'll say it in front again, and then come back and So they say here that Solomon made foreigners, 70,000 of them bear burdens, 80 of them were stone cutters, 3,006 were supervisors. What I just read before, I'm reading it again. The temple began at Mount Moriah, at the threshing floor of Aruna, where David gave. David bought one threshing floor for 50 talents, right? Where God stopped a plague. Yeah, that place became the site for the temple. That's where David chose to build the site for the temple. So the temple began on the 2nd of, so in their time it wasn't February, but I like to use the Gregorian calendar because I like to contemporize this thing I'm reading. So in the second on the 2nd of February, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, he begins to build the temple, 60 cubits by 20 cubits by 60 cubits length by 20 cubits width by 20 cubits depth by 120 cubits height. He overlaid the cypress panels with gold, carved palm tree designs, chain work, door beams, walls and doorposts, overlaid them with gold, cherubim on the walls. Even the Holy of Holies was 20 by 20 cubits, overlaid with 600 talents of gold. 50 gold nails were used, 2 cherubs in gold, 20 cubits high and 5 cubits wing length. 5 cubits wing length, standing facing inwards. So a lot of fabric of blue, purple, crimson were used, linen, temple pillars 35 cubits in height, and the chain work from pomegranate, and the pillars, they did 2 pillars named Jachin and Boaz. I'm not sure why. Boaz, I know, is David's great grandfather. David's great grandfather. Anyway, so that ends our Old Testament reading today. Our New Testament is Romans chapter 6, and I'll try to run through it very quickly. So Romans says, so should sin abound because we have grace? So I took time to explain yesterday that wherever there is sin, there's more grace available to overcome that sin in any situation you find yourself. That's what I read. I understood from what I read. So just imagine that Paul is arguing with the Jews back and forth in Rome, and the Jews in Rome were much more civil than the Jews back home in Jerusalem. The Jews back home in Jerusalem, they would wrestle him to the ground, but the Jews in Rome, they engage him in intellectual debates. So he says, should we now allow ourselves be sinning because there's grace available to us? Of course not. Of course not. We have died to sin, and we have been baptized into his death. So when we were baptized into his death, and when we come out, we are free. We are now dead people, And he goes on to explain that we have been baptized into his death and even to his resurrection. Our old mindsets, our old beliefs, our old ways of life were crucified, and we're no longer slaves to sin. There's this popular song, I'm no longer a slave to fear, I am a child of God. I think they took it from this scripture. We're no longer slaves to sin. We believe we have been raised to life and will die no more, spiritually. We're not living to God, we're alive in Jesus. So let's sin not reign in our physical bodies. Let us not do the things that are considered sin with our physical bodies. Subjecting it to its lust and its issues, its tempers, its angers, its unbridled sexual tension, and all of that stuff. Sin should not have dominion over you, for you are now under grace, not under the law. So does grace now permit us to sin? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Paul is having arguments with the Jews. And so Paul says, he asks this question, he answers himself. He says, of course, no. Sinning means you are still obeying your master, death, and death is a master. You've been set free from death, and you are now a slave of righteousness. And righteousness just basically means that you are able to do the right thing at the right time. You understand? You are not a slave of righteousness. Your faculties that were once slave to sin is now available to God, available to the right thing. So unrighteousness can be that you indulge yourself in too much chocolate. That's like a sin. So is eating chocolate sin? No. But the basic definition of sin, I wish I had my tab here. I would have googled what sin was. The basic definition of sin is to miss the mark. So we can miss the mark even in doing the right thing. We can be drinking and then sin after a while. We can eat and then sin after a while. We can dress beautifully and then it can become sin. Why? Because we miss the mark after a while. So the idea of sin is not that this is wrong, this is right, this is my belief. The idea of sin is that this is what God has asked you to do. It can easily become sin. So gluttony, excessive eating can become sin. Having sex is not a sin, but having sex with someone you're not supposed to be having sex with becomes a sin, you know. So he's saying that our bodies should not be slave to lawless and unclean living anymore. Our bodies should not be reserved for living right. And then, so what are even the benefits of avoiding? What are the benefits of even living right? And he goes on to say, well, the wages, the paycheck for sin is death, and but the free gift of God is life. And so choose life, choose the free gift of God, which is life. And so the argument becomes, but people still die anyway. Yes, we have to discard this body at some point in our lives, but let your spirit be alive to God. There's something so powerful about having a spirit that is alive to God. Okay, and that's what Paul is addressing here. Most of Paul's arguments are addressing the issue of your spirit being. Okay, all right, let's quickly look at, so that brings our Romans to an end. I'm a bit under the weather today, so I don't know if you can tell, if you followed me. I feel a bit dull today. All right, let's quickly look at Proverbs 19, and then in a minute we'll be done. Proverbs 19, 20 to 21. So Proverbs 19, 20. It says, listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your later days. You may be wise when you're older. There are many plans in a man's heart, never the Lord. The Lord's counsels is what the Lord's counsel will never. Okay, so this is King James English. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel is what will stand. That's what that means right there. So thank you for joining me today. I don't know who this famous person is, who this celebrity is. She tells me to Google her. All right, so thank you all for joining me today. I'm glad to be here. And I hope you enjoyed the session today. I'll see you tomorrow. Please subscribe to my channel. Turn on the notification button so that you know when next I go live. And share this with someone you think is curious about the Bible. And I'll see you tomorrow.